Welcome back. In this third and final video, I'm going to show you how to use the step-by-step lesson plan portion of the Core Knowledge Language Arts Teacher's Guides for 4th grade and up. If you're looking for information on the language arts curriculum for kindergarten through 3rd grade, I do have videos for that both on my website and on my YouTube channel. Now, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to watch the first 2 videos where I explain how the language arts curriculum is structured, the free files you'll need to download from the Core Knowledge website, as well as how to use the introduction section of the teacher's guide to get ready to teach the unit, and how to use the pausing point days and assessments. Okay, before we start looking at the example lesson, 2 quick reminders. First, the Core Knowledge Language Arts curriculum can be downloaded for free from the Core Knowledge Foundation website. Second, you can download free support materials from my website, homeschoolworkplans.com. I have organization guides, unit prep checklists, daily schedules, school supply lists, and how-to videos, and more. Now, in this video, I'm going to be showing you specifically how to work through a lesson with your student, and keep in mind that all the teacher's guides for 4th through 8th grade are set up in basically the same way. So once you understand how lessons flow, you'll be in a strong position to move forward with any of the units. Now, this is a long video. In fact, it's entirely possible it will take me almost as long to explain all the details of how a lesson is laid out to you than it will take for you to give this same lesson to your student. But I promise, having a solid understanding of how each part of the lesson works will make you much more efficient as you sit down to work with your student. Okay, so let's get started with our detailed tour of the lessons portion of the teacher's guide. So first up, each teacher's guide has 4 sections: the introduction, the step-by-step lesson plans, the pausing point information, and a set of teacher resources. Now, we talked about the introduction, the pausing point, and a little about the teacher's resources in the last video. So for this video, I'm going to be showing you in detail how to use those lesson plans. Now, a quick tip. If you've already downloaded the Core Knowledge Language Arts curriculum, if you can, go ahead and open a teacher's manual in a window next to this one, so you can watch this video and follow along with one of the teacher's guides. I mean, it'd be great if you happen to be using 4th grade, go ahead and open Unit 5 and we'll turn to Lesson 2, and that will be the lesson we'll be looking at. But using that exact unit and lesson isn't necessary. I'm going to try to make these pages as big on the screen as I can, but I realize many of you are watching this on laptops and tablets, so it may be hard to read the exact text I'm talking about. Remember though, you can always come back and watch this video again once you have everything downloaded and are getting close to your first day of homeschooling. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to take a look at Lesson 2 for this unit, so let's start by taking a quick look at that daily schedule you can download for free from my website. So here we are on the daily schedule for 4th grade, and you can see that the Unit 5 Lesson 2 is scheduled for Friday of week 18. Now, this schedule you can download has every unit for each grade scheduled out, including every lesson, pausing point days, assessment days, and even catch-up days for some grades. So starting in 4th grade, every Core Knowledge Language Arts lesson begins with a page that looks like this. It lists out the objectives and focus for the lesson, as well as gives an overview of the activities you'll be doing and the materials needed. So let's look through this page one section at a time. Right up at the top, you'll see the main content objectives for the lesson. Remember, content means the information about the unit topic, in this case, geology. In this lesson, students will be learning to identify Earth's layers and explain the characteristics of each, explain the theory of plate tectonics and describe the different ways tectonic plates move, and explain how seafloor spreading causes mid-ocean ridges and ocean trenches. Next up, you'll see a box in the middle, and this is an overview of how the lesson will flow. Now, as you saw in the first video, the teacher's guide is color-coded. So at the top there, you see a purple section, and purple is the color code for reading. For this lesson, we'll be reading Chapter 2 with a student, and the title of the chapter is Earth's Layers and Moving Plates. In the next column, you'll see an estimated time of 40 minutes for this portion of the lesson. Now keep in mind that all time estimates in the teacher's guides for language arts, as well as any of the Core Knowledge teacher's guides, are based on the curriculum being used in a classroom. So in almost every case, it is significantly more efficient to work with 1 or 2 children than 30 children at once. So take these time estimates with a grain of salt. Core knowledge estimates set in a classroom. A language arts lesson, the entire lesson will generally take about 90 minutes a day. As a homeschooler, assuming everyone's ready to go and motivated, this lesson will probably take closer to an hour. And yes, that probably sounds like a lot, especially if you're an experienced homeschooler and you're used to quick lessons. But remember, this language arts lesson covers all the language arts topics. So this is your reading lesson, your grammar lesson, spelling, writing, literature, all of it rolled up into one lesson for the school day. So compared to other homeschooling curriculum, you may actually spend less time on language arts with this curriculum simply because combining them into one lesson is way more efficient. Now, moving over to the materials column on the right, you'll see that we need the student reader. It's titled The Changing Earth, activity pages 1.3 to 1.5, and activity page 2.1. They also have the evidence collectors chart listed there, which happens to be activity page 1.3, and then scissors and glue. All right, now the student reader file and the activity book file are located in that folder of unit files you downloaded from the Core Knowledge website. We talked about that in the first video. And the student reader PDF file can simply be opened on a tablet or laptop and read. If you want to print out the reader, you could, but it's a color file, so it's typically not worth printing them. The activity book, though, of course, you will need to have printed before the unit began. And it's black and white. You can print it double-sided. And you'll just store those pages in a binder or have them spiral bound at your local office supply store. Now, I know at a glance, this looks like a lot of things for one part of a lesson, but I promise it's really not. It's just the student reader file pulled up on a tablet or laptop, and it's some pages from the activity book you've already printed. That's it. All right, so if we go down to the red section on that chart, red is for grammar, spelling, and morphology. There are 2 activities listed, and the first is the introduction to using commas, and I will point out that introduction is a loose term here. It's the introduction for this grade level. Your student will have seen comma usage in previous grade levels, albeit in a simpler form. Okay, so for the comma lesson, you'll need the comma poster, which is part of the digital components file. And that file, again, we talked about this in the first video, but remember that file is in that same folder of unit files you downloaded from the Core Knowledge website. It's the same place you found the teacher's guide, the student reader, and the activity book. Now, you can choose to print the digital components, and in some cases, you may find that easier. So like in this situation, you could if you printed it, you could just set this piece of paper, it's called a poster, next to your student. Or you also could just access the digital components on a laptop or tablet. It's just a PDF file, and you could just use it when you need it during a lesson. Now, the commas activity also requires activity page 2.2, so I stuck that up here on the slide as well. And the next down is the morphology activity. Morphology, by the way, is the study of word forms. So this is things like adding prefixes and suffixes to words, working with word roots, that sort of thing. In this case, it's the same concept as the comma activity. There's a suffixes poster located in the digital components file, and you'll also need activity page 2.3. All right, moving down to the green section. Green is for writing. And for this lesson, your student will be examining and learning to use similes. A simile is a literary device we can use when we're writing. And specifically, a simile compares 2 things using the word like or the word as. For example, the white clouds were as fluffy as sheep grazing in a pasture. Or, the girl was mad like a brewing storm. Now, don't worry if you've personally never learned this concept, or maybe it's been many years since you've had. I'll show you in a few minutes how this curriculum will walk you through step by step. Now, you see on the right-hand side there, the simile activity requires activity page 2.4 as well as the student reader. And then finally, the last section is marked take-home material. Again, this curriculum was originally designed for classrooms, but as a homeschooler, we don't typically assign homework. So my recommendation is to simply plan on doing those worksheets as part of your school day. They are important practice. The exceptions would be if you're out of time, maybe your student is feeling burned out that day, or if the topics that are being covered on the worksheets are truly something your student has already mastered. Now, in this case, for this lesson, the pages suggested for homework are the same activity pages you'll be working on in the other sections. So what they're suggesting here is that a teacher would start the activity pages with the class, but maybe there wouldn't be time to finish them, and so they would send them home as homework. As a homeschooler, you will probably not have that issue, and so you'll just be completing the activity pages as part of the lesson and ignoring the suggestions for homework. Now, a quick note before we move on. If you ever have a case where a resource is specified for a lesson and it's not the student reader or the activity book, you'll likely find that resource in either the digital components file for the unit or in the back of the teacher's guide in the teacher resources section. That section contains all sorts of important things. For example, for this unit, there are area study cards, image cards, rubrics, as well as some resources for the enrichment selections you can use on the pausing point days. You can also find resources for your student in the back of the activity book. Things like code charts to help them remember their spelling skills, and rubrics and editing checklists for helping them with their writing assignments. Now, moving on to the last section of that first page, the primary focus of the lessons, and this includes the goals for the language arts skills, are listed here. So let's just take a quick look at these. So for reading, the goals, students will be able to identify evidence of Earth's layers and tectonic plates interacting to change the surface of the Earth. And so they're talking about reading comprehension there, that your student will have read the reader and will understand that concept by the end. For grammar, the student will be able to identify the correct location of commas in dates, addresses, city and state, and items in a series. For morphology, the student will be able to distinguish between root words and words with the suffix ly, and then use those words correctly in sentences. And then for writing, the student will be able to explain similes related to geological concepts. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to point out more examples of this as we go along, but right up front here, you can see how having a rich subject as the base of the unit is giving students engaging material to work with. So this unit's theme is geology. And so instead of reading a random passage and practicing their reading comprehension skills that way, your student's going to be reading a carefully chosen topic that is systematically expanding their knowledge and vocabulary for an important area of science and laying groundwork for future science units, in particular a science unit coming up in a few weeks where they'll be looking at the processes that shape the Earth. Now, same with the writing instruction. Instead of having them attempt to construct random similes or analyze random similes, they're given a specific topic they just learned about. So they have knowledge of geological ideas right there fresh in their mind to help them analyze these similes they will see in the chapter for today. Honestly, that is so much easier to do, right? You can be more successful trying to come up with similes or analyze similes if you know something about the topic. So by providing that content support, we're increasing the odds that your student will be able to spend their lesson focused on really analyzing what the simile means versus struggling with the basic concept or the material that the simile is talking about. All right, so moving on to the next page, you'll see here at the top, this is the list of suggestions for advanced preparation. Now again, this is more focused on a classroom teacher preparing for the day, but let me show you how I use this when I'm homeschooling my own kids. It is helpful to scan through this the night before and figure out which of these preps you need to do and spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes getting ready. This can just make your school day a little bit smoother when you get to the language arts part of the school day. All right, so the first suggestion is for the reading lesson, and they're suggesting we write the purpose of the reading for today on the board or chart paper. Now, I do think having this question handy is helpful, and if you have a whiteboard or a chalkboard, it's simple to just write it out. But a quick tip, if you open the digital components file, there's a page with this question written out in big letters that you can use. It also has the big question for the chapter on there as well. All right, let me show you that actually. And in that same section, they also suggest displaying or having out on the table the evidence collectors chart. Your student will have started in the last lesson. So this is an activity page that they're adding to in these couple of lessons. Okay, next up for advanced prep is grammar, and they suggest having the comma poster handy. Again, this is just in that digital components file, and you can either pull the page up on a tablet or laptop, or you can print a copy. And really, whether you print a copy of materials like this is going to be a matter mainly of whether your child needs that reinforcement of having a copy sitting right there. Some kids need that. Some kids, though, are just going to look at it once or twice, or maybe look at it on a screen and be done. They understand the concept, they're moving on. Okay, so then these instructions are telling us that we should write out some practice sentences on a board or chart paper. So what's really important to understand here is that these sentences are going to be used to initially teach your student about comma use before they start working on their activity page. So these are the sentences we're going to demonstrate to them and how to use those rules and where to put the commas. Now, whether or not you actually need to write these out is again dependent on what your student needs as well as your own teaching preferences. After all, you only have to show these sentences to one student, not a whole room full of students. Okay, so for something like this, I might skip writing them out because that takes a lot of time and I don't have a lot of time. And so instead, what I might do is just show my daughter my tablet, turn to this page and maybe enlarge this section with a set of sentences and we'll look at them together. Or sometimes what I'll do, especially if we want to write the commas directly on the sentences, is I'll print a copy of this page, just black and white, and we can use that to work on those sentences together. I don't write them on the whiteboard. Like I said, it takes a lot of time. And also think about what else you use. If you have a whiteboard, what else you're going to use it for. Like I use my whiteboard all day long for all of my kids, multiple subjects. There is no way I can spare this level of space the night before. That just wouldn't work for my workflow. Okay, and then finally for advanced prep down there at the bottom for the morphology section, this one continues on the next page too, so I have two boxes here. They're just suggesting displaying the suffixes poster, which of course again is located in the digital components file. Just like the comma poster, over time you'll get a feel for whether you need to print this and set it out right by your student or whether you can open the digital components file and show them this page. And specifically here, they have a note that over the course of the school year, you're going to be adding posters with prefixes and word roots. So it may be helpful to your student to print these out and hang them up on the wall. You could put them in a binder with page protectors, something like that, so that they're easy to reference. Now, before we dive into the part of the lesson where you're going to work with your student directly, a quick note here. Core knowledge is what is known as a scripted curriculum. This means that it's going to walk you through exactly how to give this lesson to your student, what to talk about for the review, exactly how you should introduce the chapter, the things you should point out or talk to your student about as you're reading each page of the student reader. Especially if you're new to homeschooling or maybe you're just new to the core knowledge curriculum, this is really helpful. You don't ever have to worry about whether or not you're going to know how to teach them something. These detailed step-by-step instructions make it really simple to work through the lesson and nothing important will be missed. Okay, so let's dive into the reading portion of the lesson. You'll see right up front that the reading lesson is color-coded purple, right? We talked about that. So the purple box on this page and the subsequent pages is the primary lesson information you as a teacher need to be reading. On the outside section, you'll see there's that little yellow box there. It's just reminding us that we need materials for this first part of the lesson. It's the same stuff that was listed on the first page, so there's no surprises here. In this case, we're using the student reader, the activity pages, and the evidence collectors chart they worked on in the last lesson. And then we are going to have some scissors and glue handy so they can continue to work on that evidence chart as part of this lesson. All right, so let's take a close-up look at some of these different instructions so you can get a feel for these step-by-step instructions I'm talking about. So the first section of the reading portion of the lesson is to review what was previously learned, and it lists out here exactly what you should review. There's no guesswork here. You don't have to remember what you taught the day before. You don't even have to know a lot about this subject. It's okay. Now, I will point out that the exact instructions assume you're teaching a class full of students, and they're assuming that the students took homework home the night before, but the general idea is the same. You'll be looking at the activity pages from the previous day your student worked on and reviewing what was learned. And then the next section walks you through how to introduce this new chapter, including practicing using the table of contents in the student reader, navigating to the correct chapter, and previewing the vocabulary words which are listed on one of the activity pages. You'll also be incorporating a bit of practice, including using the glossary in the back of the student reader. You'll review which part of speech each vocabulary word belongs to, so nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, that sort of thing. And remember, this sounds like a lot, right? But you're just going through this step by step with your student. I'm not making any of this up. This is literally what it says in the instructions that you're going to do step by step. All right, next up, there's a chart listed on page 36, and that is a reference for you as a teacher showing you which words are core vocabulary words for this lesson, which words have multiple meanings and might require some explanation, clarification. English is kind of fun like that, right? We have some words that mean more than one thing. Now, for this lesson, those multiple meaning words are basin and pressure. And then finally, we have listed here some sayings and phrases that are used in the reading that a student may not be familiar with and may require explanation. This is something core knowledge is really good about doing, is constantly orienting students to the broader culture, things that they might hear and making sure that they'll understand them. So for this lesson, those sayings and phrases are on the right track and driving force. And as adults, isn't it funny? We think, well, of course we know what that means, but you might want to check if your kid does. They may not. They may have picked them up in context, hearing you and other adults around them talk, or they may not have. So it's a good idea to double check. And then there in the middle of the section, you'll be directed to look at the purpose for the reading that you may have written on the board. So you're going to draw your students' attention to that, or remember it's on that digital components poster. And as a reminder, usually there's a poster for that, right? So the reading, this particular sentence that we would have written on the board or have on the poster is that the purpose today is to read to learn how new evidence led geologists to develop the theory of plate tectonics. So that's kind of our goal, right? That's what we're reading to think about. Now, finally, at the bottom, you'll point out the big question, and this is listed in the student reader at the beginning of the chapter. This is the focus of what they'll be reading. So the big question for today's lesson is, how do tectonic plates and Earth's layers interact to change the surface of the Earth? And see, you'll look up right there. I put a red circle. It's a little hard to see because it kind of matches the picture. But when you open the student reader, every time you start a new chapter, that first page of the chapter is always going to have a box that lists that big question. All right, once the introduction is complete, you'll then move on to reading the chapter with your student. For this part, you'll keep the teacher's guide open on your laptop or your tablet, and you'll have your student open the student reader file on their laptop or tablet. While you can print the student reader, these are a lot of very colorful pages, so it's not economical to print these unless you're going to use it for multiple kids or you happen to have access to really inexpensive ink. So for the sake of not making this video any longer than it already is, I'm not going to read every prompt in this chapter, in this video, or we're not even going to look at every single instruction for this next part. What I'm going to do is selectively point out a few of these so you get a feel for how this portion of the lesson flows. Okay, there's really a rhythm to this. Now, first, before you start reading, I do want to point out really quick, I mentioned a moment ago that there's an activity page for each chapter. The first activity page when you're reading a new chapter is going to have a list of vocabulary. And I often will pull this out right about now in a lesson, and I'll just take a look at it again, have my daughter look at it. I currently have a 4th grader. I have lots of other children too, but I currently do have a child who we're just finishing up this unit, coincidentally. And we'll look at this together and I'll go through and say, okay, well, do you know what this word means? Or do you know what this word means? And sometimes she does and sometimes she doesn't. But we can go through and kind of clarify a few things before we start reading. And then the others we'll just worry about as we get to them in the chapter. All right, so jumping back to the teacher's guide, let's start working through today's reading. So first, you'll see on each page of this portion of the lesson, a copy of the student reader page is displayed on one side. This is how you're going to keep track of where you're at, okay? And then in the purple box, you'll see prompts for things you should point out, questions to ask, etc. All right, so on this first page, it's actually just one small thing. You'll see a suggestion for portions that this portion you should have your student read silently, or maybe it'll say have students take turns reading in groups, or read this part to the students. So again, remember these instructions are geared towards a classroom setting. So as a homeschooler, I'm going to tell you how I do it and how I kind of rotate between these different ideas so that my kids get practice in different ways of taking in this information. Okay, so first, what I would suggest you do, unless you have an unusually independent student, the majority of the chapter really should be read aloud by you to the student, okay? However, we're obviously, of course, trying to move our students over time towards a measure of independence. So it's also a good idea to pick a section or two and have them read aloud to you. And you're doing two things here. You're giving them kind of that independence to read the chapter, but you're also listening to them read it. And this allows you to assess on a regular basis how their fluency skills are coming along. So fluency is their ability to read smoothly, accurately, and at appropriate speed and with appropriate inflection and expression. So it's a really important thing to develop, and it takes time. And you know what the best two things for that are? One, listening to someone read to them who reads fluently, and getting that practice and that feedback. Okay, and then finally, every few days, again, moving them towards independence. I'm a big believer in this. I have enough children that I need them to be a little bit independent at some point. So you'll want to have them read one short section silently. And when they're finished, have them practice telling back to you what they've learned. And this allows you, again, to assess their comprehension skills while reading on their own, and also giving them practice in explaining a concept to someone. So look at all these great skills that we can help our kids learn by just kind of varying a little bit whether they're reading to us or we're reading to them. All right, now moving on, as you work through the reading, you'll see prompts to ask your student questions or provide further explanation of a concept. And I'll point out that you will see some questions labeled by question type. Okay, so you'll see questions labeled as inferential, literal, evaluative, things like that. Sounds very official. You can ignore these question type labels. They are actually meant for classroom teachers who would need to align their lessons to state standards. Okay, so here on this page, it's explaining that earthquakes cause seismic waves, and there's a prompt here for you to ask your student how a small rock thrown into the water is like a seismic wave. Now, that may be a difficult question at this stage of the learning process for your students. So right underneath that question in that purple box are 2 support prompts so you can help your student think through the question. The first support is to ask your student what happens when a small rock hits the water. And hopefully they will answer that little ripples on the surface of the water travel outward from the point of the impact. And then you can ask them, well, what happens during an earthquake? And this should help them reason out that the waves of energy travel outward through the Earth's surface from the earthquake source, and that the waves travel causes the ground to shake. So again, especially if you're a brand new homeschooler and you're worried you don't know enough about these topics to teach your student, please don't worry. This curriculum more than any other is going to show you explicitly how to present this lesson in a constructive way. And I'll tell you a tip. By the time you get to this unit in 4th grade, you actually just had a science unit where you and your student learned all about how waves work. Sound waves, motion energy waves, all kinds of waves. So by the time you get to this unit, you'll actually have some base knowledge to work with, and so will your student, to understand these concepts. All right, now the next few pages continue in the same manner. You'll see those purple boxes for every page with questions to ask your student, and for more difficult questions, you'll have those support prompts to use. Now, 2 quick notes. First, this probably looks like a lot of pages, but it's mostly 1 question per page, and once you get into a rhythm, I promise it's not bad. Second, if you're new to homeschooling, please be assured that as you get more comfortable with the materials, what concepts your child already knows, your child's strengths and weaknesses, you'll get to a place where you'll use these questions more strategically, and occasionally you'll skip one here or there, depending on different factors. All right, so coming up towards the end of the reading, you'll get to a portion that discusses the important contribution of Danish scientist Inge Lehmann. Hope I didn't butcher that too badly. Inge Lehmann. She collected and analyzed thousands of boxes of records. Remember, no computers back then, to discover that the Earth's core was not 1 piece, but actually 2 pieces, a solid inner core and a liquid outer core. And over to the side here, you'll see a prompt for a challenge question. If your student is doing well with the material, you can use this question to help extend their thinking further. There's a lot of opportunities built into core knowledge for kids who are maybe working a little bit ahead to really extend their thinking, to dig deeper and to have those deeper conversations. You'll also see a lot of scientist profile throughout both the science-themed language arts units as well as the core knowledge science curriculum itself. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate there has clearly been a lot of effort on core knowledge's part to ensure that they are featuring a range of scientists that really represent a large number of demographic groups. It's always really nice to see. All right, once you're done with the chapter, you're going to come to this final page, and it's going to walk you through, again, step by step, how to discuss the chapter with your student and wrap up this portion of the lesson. Now, for the sake of efficiency, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I know that this far into the video, you're getting a good feel, right, for the step-by-step nature of the instructions, and this section is no exception. You'll see specific questions to ask, things to discuss, and it will guide you through helping them add to the evidence collector's chart they're working on. The instructions will also help you bring in some simple map work, showing current map of the position of the continents, which is drastically different from where they were located long ago. All right, so the final piece to this reading portion of the lesson is called word work. Now, these word work mini lessons are quick. They're generally 3 to 5 minutes. You'll see them in most lessons. And in this section, you're going to be walked through guiding your student to better understand and learn to properly use a key word from the lesson. So for this lesson, the word is crust. Very simple. And you'll use these few minutes to review what they learned the last 2 days about the Earth's crust, as well as talk about the fact that the word crust has several meanings within the English language. And there are step-by-step instructions here to help guide them through separating those different meanings out and using this word correctly in different contexts. Okay, so that wraps up the reading themed lesson. Let's move on to the next page with this red section, which is the color for grammar, spelling, and morphology. Now, there's not a specific spelling lesson today, but we will be tackling grammar first and then morphology. And I promise there are plenty of spelling lessons in this curriculum too. Okay, with this new section, again, over on the side, you see the reminder of the materials we'll be using and the comma poster and the activity page 2.2. Now, the comma poster is one of those we could just pull up and print from the digital components or, have it up on a tablet, something like that. And so this first part of the lesson is introducing using commas for this grade level. Your student will have used commas previously, but today in particular, they're focusing on using commas in dates, addresses, and items in a series. Now again, this portion of the lesson is going to give you step-by-step instructions for demonstrating using commas in a few example sentences, and these are the same sentences you saw during that prep portion of the lesson we talked through earlier. Now, you may have written these sentences down on the board, or for these sorts of exercises, maybe you've just printed the page of the teacher's manual, for example. But step by step, you're going to show your student how to add commas to each of those 6 sentences, and these instructions are going to tell you what to do. So even if you don't remember all the comma rules, it's okay. It's got your back on this one. All right, so the instructions here lay out how to explain to your student why a comma is used in each case. There's also a note on the side that one of the sentences already has a comma in it, and it doesn't conform to any of the 3 specific rules we're looking at. And if your student is picking up on that and asks you a question, this note actually walks you through explaining to your student that the comma is being used to separate a clause, and that they just haven't learned that rule for commas yet, but they will in the future. So once you've worked through the previous, once you've worked through the example sentences and showed them how to use the comma rules, the last part of the exercise is for the student to practice. So here, the lesson directs you to have them work on activity page 2.2 and add commas to the appropriate locations in those sentences. Okay, now a quick note. You'll see here in the morphology activity page, the work on, in a few minutes, there's a note saying to have the student complete the worksheet as homework. Remember, we talked about that earlier. We don't need to worry about that. Our students will just be completing these worksheets as part of our lesson for today. All right, next up we have the morphology section, and the note on the side again reminds us that we're going to need that suffix poster from the digital components file and activity page 2.3. All right, again, step-by-step notes here, right? The teacher's guide is going to walk us through how to teach our student how to use the suffix ly. We'll be explaining that adding ly changes the meaning of a word from something like careful to carefully, meaning in a careful way. This lesson will also direct you to talk through how to introduce it's going to talk you through how to introduce the concept to your student that adding ly to an adjective transforms it into an adverb. And remember, adjectives modify nouns and adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. All right, just like the last lesson, you'll be showing your student a few sentences, and these sentences are the ones in the white boxes there, to demonstrate adding the suffix ly to change the meaning of the word. All right, after that, you get this handy chart of 5 words to again use as examples. So if you have a whiteboard or a chalkboard, you're just going to be writing the word up there, such as the word accidental, asking the student what the word means, adding the ly suffix, and again, asking the student what the word means now. Okay, 2 quick things here. First, if you don't have a whiteboard or a chalkboard, don't worry about it. You don't need to spend money on that. You can just sit next to your student and use a piece of paper to write these things out. Secondly, I know for most adults, it's been a really long time since you've thought about something like suffixes or adjectives or adverbs. And I want to emphasize that at no point during this lesson will you need to come up with any of this. Every example, every explanation, it's all laid out in the lesson for you. So then after you've given your student this example practice, you'll have them use activity page 2.3 for more practice. And right there at the bottom, again, in the teacher's guide, it's suggesting that we help students complete the first 2 sentences in the activity page and then give them a chance to do the others on their own and providing support as needed. All right, so that's it for the grammar and morphology portion of the lesson. So let's go ahead and turn the page and tackle the third and final part of the lesson, which is writing. Okay, so here we have our green section for writing. And so right up there at the top, we see that today's writing lesson is a short one. The topic is similes. I'm going to show you the activity page on the next slide for this one. We're just going to use the activity page of the student reader. So again, there's step-by-step instructions here. And in this case, we'll be reminding students that they've already learned in a previous lesson that a simile is a literary device that compares 2 things using the words like or as. If you've been out of school for a while, this is something like the ground is as hard as a rock, or the water in the bathtub moved like waves on the sea. So because they are practicing a previously learned skill today, this portion of the lesson is actually really straightforward. It's just, again, step-by-step instructions. You'll have them turn to activity page 2.4, and they'll be analyzing one by one similes that were used in today's reading. So they're not going to come up with similes in this activity. They're going to analyze ones from within the reading. And then they're going to fill out a table that will ask them what the simile is comparing and what does the simile mean. And that sounds simple, but it actually takes quite a bit of thought. All right, so for example, a simile on page 13 of the student reader said, an earthquake is a bit like a rock plunking into the water. Okay, and then on this worksheet in the table, the student will then explain what the simile is comparing. Okay, that part's not too difficult, right? It's comparing an earthquake with a rock in the water. And then your student needs to explain what the simile means. And that's where it gets tricky. This is where you might have to provide some support. Okay, so the simile means in this case that seismic waves travel through the earth from the source of the earthquake, just as a rock is a source of waves traveling out from the spot where it hit the water. All right, so there's several of those that they'll work through. And then the final instruction for this section is to wrap up the lesson by asking the student to explain to you what a simile is to reinforce that they've retained the concept in this lesson. Okay, now I want to point out something really quickly here. I know what I just said sounded a little bit complicated in terms of the answers. There are always answers to every single worksheet, every single activity. In this case, you can see up at the top in that green section that the answers to this are like right there in the teacher's guide for you. There are also always answers, no matter which of these language arts teacher's guides you're using. There are always answers in the back of the teacher's guide for every single activity page. So don't worry, you'll never be lost. You'll be able to look at the answer if you need it. All right, so the bottom section there, that yellow orangish section, that's our kind of our administrative section. It's reminding us about the homework. Again, we're ignoring that though because we're homeschoolers and we don't do homework. We've already completed our activity pages and we are going to move on to our next subject here shortly. All right, so that's it. That's a whole 4th grade language arts lesson. Do you feel like you can do it? I know you can do this. So like I said previously, a lesson like this, including reading the student reader together, will typically take about an hour. Some days it'll be a little more, some days it'll be a little less. Now, here's your tip. Especially in the beginning, especially if you're a new homeschooler or you're new to core knowledge, try to read through each lesson the night before. It's going to take you 10 minutes, and being able to take that time will really help ensure that you can move through this material smoothly with your student, and there will be less fumbling around trying to figure out what you need and what's going on in the lesson. Okay, I'm sure my kids will be happy to tell you that I'm the queen of fumbling, especially before I've had my coffee. So I can say that doing a little bit of prep work the night before can really be helpful for things going smoothly the next day. All right, so that's it for this video and for the 3 videos. I'm hopeful these videos have been helpful to you and that you now feel more comfortable diving in and using the Core Knowledge Language Arts curriculum. It really is a rich and academically strong curriculum, and those step-by-step instructions are always there to help you. Please be sure to download the free support resources from my website, homeschoolworkplans.com. These will help you get everything organized and gather any unique supplies you might need for a lesson. There's also more how-to videos and a daily schedule available, not only for core knowledge language arts, but I actually also have all the support materials available for core knowledge social studies and their science curriculums, both of which are excellent, as well as MEP math curriculum, which is also high quality, free, and downloadable. All right, so that's it for now. Best wishes on your homeschooling journey.